My husband and I adopted a child from an orphanage because my husband is infertile and it so happened that he is always at work and I take care of my son, raised him to 19 years old as my own, and that night he thanked me. My name is Helen. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed in calm. Not happiness. Not ecstasy. Not the wild, unpredictable waves that pull some women through relationships and leave them broken at the shore. No. I believed in stillness. In stability. In routines that did not ask questions. I married Mark when I was 32. He was 45. Self-made. Sharp. Reliable. There was something about the way he never rushed anything, from his morning toast to his business contracts, that made me feel safe. He didn't charm rooms. He ordered them. People listened to him without knowing why. Our home was a white brick colonial tucked into a quiet suburb. Mark ran his own design firm. I handled the house. Gardens. Laundry folded into tight squares. Vases always had fresh lilies. The floor was quiet under bare feet. We had a good life. Predictable, yes. But good. At first, we tried. Eagerly. Hopefully. Doctors. Tests. Vitamins. Prayers whispered in low voices before appointments. I tracked cycles, temperatures, symptoms. I stopped drinking caffeine. We planned weekends around the idea of conception. Mark never complained. He called it a project, like everything else in his life. Let's stay efficient about it, he would say, drawing schedules, color-coding days, calculating. I tried to match his energy, tried to believe it was enough. But it's hard to be efficient with something so intangible. Months passed, then years. And every time we returned from another failed visit, Mark would squeeze my hand and say the same thing. It just wasn't meant to be. I smiled. But inside, I was unraveling. Not from disappointment, but from the steady, suffocating acceptance he insisted on. Other women talked about miracles. About trying for 6, 7 years before finally it happened. But for us, there was no miracle. Just the silence that deepens when you no longer ask the question aloud. We began avoiding certain streets, ones with toy stores, playgrounds. I donated the unused baby clothes I had bought in a moment of premature joy. I turned off movies that had scenes with lullabies. We built another kind of life. Elegant. Orderly. Dinner parties. Business galas. Vacations to places with white robes and infinity pools. We smiled for pictures. I had dresses in every shade of restraint. Mark always looked sharp. But I began to feel invisible inside that polished world. There was a restlessness I couldn't name. I filled it with charity work, organized drives, volunteered at women's shelters, tutored at a local literacy center. But each time I handed a child a book or held a paper cup of juice during story time, something inside me ached with a longing I could no longer dismiss. Then, one morning, I brought it up over coffee. What if we adopted? He didn't look up from the paper. We've discussed this. Not seriously. Yes, we have. I mean now. Actually doing it. He set the cup down. Helen, you know how I feel. I know you wanted your own. I did too. But we're not broken. We can still give someone a life. A home. He shook his head. If we're going to adopt, I want a girl. The sentence was sharp. Final. Not cruel, but immovable. A girl. I can't raise a boy, Helen. I wouldn't know how. I'd just get in the way. And I would. You're softer. You'd be good for a girl. I stared at him, unsure if I should laugh or cry. You'd get in the way? He stood up, adjusted his cufflinks. Drop it. Please. That day, I went for a walk. My steps were aimless. I passed children riding bikes. A woman with a stroller. A father holding his son's backpack. And something broke open. It wasn't anger. Not even grief. Just a crack in the silence. That night we fought. Not with shouting. We didn't shout. With distance. With glances. With phrases like, I thought we were partners. And, you're being emotional. And finally, you know what? I'm staying at the office tonight. The door closed. The hallway echoed. I sat in the living room. Lights off. The only sound was the clock ticking beside me. It was our 10th year of marriage. And for the first time, I realized I had spent most of it waiting for permission to feel what I already knew. I wanted to be a mother. Not someday. Now. Even if it meant doing it alone. The next morning, I didn't hear from him. He wasn't home by sunrise. I showered slowly, got dressed in a soft blue blouse and long skirt, and walked into the kitchen like it was a new house. Like I was its only resident. I cleaned the countertops. I fed the cat. I made breakfast for one. And then I opened my laptop. I typed, local adoption centers. I pressed enter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for Mark's approval. Only my own. It was mid-September when the silence between us solidified into something structural. Not a pause, not a wound, but a wall. Mark and I continued to live as if everything was ordinary. We said good morning. We passed each other coffee. We made our shared bed in silence. He had never returned to the conversation. Not about the boy. Not about that night. And I, perhaps to preserve the illusion, didn't press. But something was already moving inside me, slow, steady, undeniable. I began visiting the adoption center in the afternoons, always when Mark was at work. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too sacred, too fragile to name aloud. The women there knew me only as Mrs. H. I said I was just volunteering at first. Helping out. Organizing books, helping with snacks, sitting beside children while they drew. That's when I saw him. He was 9. Quiet. Thin. But not fragile. His name was Daniel. He never rushed to answer questions. Never raised his voice. But when he looked at you, really looked, it felt like standing still in the middle of a moving crowd. His eyes held weight. Not sadness, wisdom. The first time I handed him a coloring pencil, his fingers brushed mine. He looked up, then down again. Thank you, he whispered. The second time, he asked if he could sit beside me. I said yes. He leaned gently against my arm as he drew. A house. A small one. One door, one window, a chimney. No people. The third time, he asked if I had children. I hesitated. Not yet, I said. He looked at me with something that might have been hope. After that day, I stopped pretending I was only volunteering. I spoke to the director. I filled out papers. I underwent the background check. I prepared documents. I drove home with a folder in the passenger seat and my heart pounding like I was doing something wrong or something finally, deeply right. Mark noticed nothing. He was consumed with a new project. A hotel renovation in Toronto. He flew in and out of the city for meetings, came home late, left early. Sometimes he'd leave notes on the fridge. Don't wait up. Long day tomorrow. I stopped reading them. Not out of spite. Out of a kind of emotional fatigue. I was already parenting in my mind. Daniel and I saw each other more frequently now. I brought him books. Games. Simple things. One afternoon, I brought a puzzle, 500 pieces. We sat together at a low table. He took his time. He matched edges, corners, worked without speaking. You're patient, I said. He looked at me. You are too. He didn't smile, but something in his voice made me feel as if I'd been seen. I wanted to bring him home that night, but I waited. Not for Mark's permission. For the right moment. Our anniversary approached. 10 years. A decade. It should have meant something monumental. Renewal. Reflection. I prepared quietly. I picked up a small cake. Made his favorite dinner, rosemary chicken, garlic potatoes, a bottle of red wine he kept tucked away for occasions. I didn't decorate the house. I didn't light candles. I didn't want it to feel like a stage. At 6 o'clock, Mark came home. He was dressed well. Not from work, he had changed. He had shaved, wore cologne I hadn't smelled in months. In his hand, a small black box. I remembered, he said. He handed me the box. Inside, a ring. Not diamond. Something subtler. A sapphire. Deep blue. It reminded me of your eyes, he added. I opened my mouth to say thank you. And then, wait here, I whispered. I walked down the hall. My hands trembled. In the guest room, Daniel sat quietly on the edge of the bed. He wore a buttoned shirt. His shoes were polished. His hair combed back. Are you ready? I asked. He nodded. I held out my hand. We walked together down the hall, toward the man who didn't know what was coming. Mark turned. This is Daniel, I said. He's our son. I watched his face. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. A flash of something unspoken. But he didn't speak. Not immediately. Daniel stepped forward. Hello, sir. Mark forced a smile. Hello. Silence. Dinner was quiet. Mark picked at his food. Daniel sat perfectly straight, eating slowly. I tried to fill the space with light talk. The weather. The garden. Nothing landed. After dinner, Mark poured himself a drink and retreated to the den. Daniel helped me with the dishes. Did he not want me? He asked. I dried my hands. He needs time. Daniel nodded. That night, Mark slept in the guest room. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the air vent. The quietest house in the world, full of what we never said. I got up once to check on Daniel. He was asleep, curled on his side, hands under his cheek. I sat beside the bed, brushed a hair from his forehead, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had come home. Weeks passed. Mark avoided the subject. He left early, came home late. When he did speak, it was functional. Bills, groceries, small repairs. But Daniel stayed close. He read beside me in the evenings. We cooked together. He began calling me Mom. Every time he said it, something inside me softened and healed. One night, Mark looked at me across the dinner table. You wanted this. You raise him. I didn't argue. Daniel heard it. He didn't say anything, but he stopped saying Dad. Years moved in circles after that. Quiet, consistent. Mark faded into the furniture. Daniel filled the space. He grew tall. Broad shoulders. Gentle hands. He never raised his voice. Never slammed a door. But the way he looked at me changed. Not suddenly. Slowly. Not with rebellion. With reverence. I ignored it. Then I denied it. Then I couldn't anymore. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because I didn't know what he saw when he looked at me. I only knew what I felt when I looked back. The years that followed were marked not by milestones, but by avoidance. Quiet avoidance. A silence that pressed down on the house like fog, not choking, just enough to dim the view. Daniel grew. He grew into his name, into his bones, into the room that was once a guest room, then a child's, and then a place where a young man folded his shirts with precision and lined his books in quiet rows. At 17, he was already taller than Mark. At 18, he rarely spoke at dinner unless spoken to. By 19, he was a man in presence, if not yet in title. Mark, for his part, faded into the margins. He took his retirement early, citing stress and the industry changing. I never asked which industry because it no longer mattered. He filled his time with gardening, home repairs that didn't need doing, and long walks that ended nowhere. He seemed content to drift in and out of the home like furniture that had grown used to its place. But the tension between him and Daniel never softened. They coexisted. That's all. Mark never said unkind things to him, but he never praised him either. When Daniel brought home top scores from school, Mark said, "Good. Keep it up." When Daniel offered to help shovel snow, Mark nodded and left without a word. Daniel stopped trying around 16. He stopped saying Dad. He said Mark only when necessary. But he never stopped being kind to me. If anything, his kindness deepened. He brought me tea in the evenings, helped with groceries without being asked, sat with me during storms because I hated thunder. He knew when my shoulders ached and warmed a towel for me without comment. He noticed everything. I began to wonder when it had happened, the shift, when the line between mother and son had softened into something else. Not inappropriate, just different. He watched me differently, not like a child watching a caretaker, but like a person watching the only light left in a dark room. I ignored it. Then I denied it. Then, one day, Mark said what had been brewing for too long. He's 19. It's time he moved out. We were in the kitchen. I was chopping onions. My hands didn't stop moving, but my breath did. He's still in school, I said. He can be in school from a dorm. You didn't mean that. Mark leaned against the counter. His arms folded. You've made him dependent. He's soft. And frankly, he's never thanked you for anything. That cut deeper than I thought it would. He's kind, I said. Quiet. Respectful. He helps with. He's still here, Helen. Grown man. Still here. Living under our roof, under your wing. And he doesn't even call me his father. You told him not to. Mark didn't flinch. And he obeyed. Convenient. I set down the knife. Washed my hands slowly. He's not going anywhere. Then maybe I will. He said it not as a threat, but as a release. That night, we slept in separate rooms again. Daniel didn't ask why. But I saw the change in his eyes when he looked at me across the table. He knew something had shifted. And I knew he had heard. A few nights later, I found him in the garage working on an old bike. One we hadn't ridden in years. His hands were stained with grease. There was sweat at the collar of his shirt. You're fixing that? I asked. He looked up. Smiled. You used to ride it, he said. I nodded. It's been a long time. I thought maybe you'd want to again. The words hit me in a place I didn't know was still soft. I sat beside him on the bench. Watched his hands. His fingers, once small enough to curl around mine, now long, steady, deliberate. I'm sorry about earlier, I said. You don't have to explain. He thinks you should leave. Daniel looked at the bike chain. Then at me. And do you? I couldn't answer. Instead, I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. The gesture was maternal. At least I told myself it was. But the air between us shifted. He leaned into the touch. Just slightly. And something in my chest bloomed and burned. I stood quickly. I'll let you finish, I said. And left. The next morning, the bike stood polished by the door. A note tied to the handlebar, ready whenever you are. I didn't write it. Not yet. But I touched the seat, and it felt warm under my hand. Mark stopped speaking to Daniel entirely. The house felt like a triangle. 3 corners, no center. But in the evenings, Daniel sat with me in the kitchen. We played cards. He read aloud from old novels. Sometimes he cooked. One night, after he made pasta, he poured me a glass of wine. We sat in the garden. The air was soft. The stars scattered. You should leave him, he said suddenly. I turned. Daniel, you're not happy. I looked down. It's complicated. No, it's not. He was 19, and already he understood the things I had spent years trying not to see. You deserve more. I closed my eyes. And in that moment, I wasn't his mother. I was just a woman. Tired, tender, and seen. The day before he left, Daniel was quiet. Quieter than usual, and not because he was angry. There was something graceful about it, a quiet like someone carrying a secret gently in their arms, careful not to let it spill. Every move he made that day had weight. Not hesitation, but intent. I watched him as he moved through the house, silently, slowly. He wasn't avoiding me. He was preserving something. Preparing. He spent most of the day in his room, then the garage, then walking slow circles through the garden that Mark no longer tended. I watched him from the window. He didn't seem lost, only deliberate, like someone counting down to something only he knew was coming. That evening, just after the sky tipped into blue, he knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I turned down the music. The same old record that always played too softly to fill the house. Of course. He didn't sit. He stayed in the doorway like someone not planning to stay long. "I've been thinking," he said, voice calm, "about how long I've been here. About what you've given me." I nodded, unsure what he was building toward. He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough to bring his voice into softer range. "I want to give something back," he said. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Not entirely. He smiled, just barely. "Maybe not, but I want to. Just something." One night, I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There was something in his eyes that made my heart stutter. "Okay," I whispered. He left. That night, he set the table himself. A cloth I hadn't seen in years. Candles, the thick white ones I kept for guests. A simple meal. Nothing extravagant. But every detail carefully placed. Like he'd been watching me do it his whole life. Because he had. I dressed simply. A pale blouse. Slacks. Comfortable. But still. There was something different about the way I moved. Not nervousness. But something in my shoulders that hadn't lifted in years. The mirror showed it to me. Not youth, but softness. A remembered softness. At dinner, he asked questions. About my childhood. My first book. The way I used to wear my hair. He laughed at my stories, but not loudly. Just enough to show he was listening. Every time his eyes met mine, it felt like the world quieted. After dinner, we walked. The air was cool. Not cold. The stars were visible. The neighborhood silent. He reached for my hand. I let him. It felt neither wrong nor right. Only inevitable. Like something that had waited too long in silence to finally be acknowledged. We said very little. Back home, the house was dark. Only one light in the hallway. He paused at the stairs, turned to me. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. I felt it in my chest, sharp and full. I thought, "I know." His voice was steady. Too steady. It was the kind of steadiness that comes after a decision has already been made. He stepped forward. Close enough for me to feel it. Not heat. Not urgency. Just the weight of everything he'd carried in silence. "I just want you to know," he said, "that you were the beginning of me. And I wanted, for one night, to be something that reminded you who you are." I didn't answer. I couldn't. But I didn't move. He waited. Gently. Without pressure. Like someone placing something fragile on the table and backing away. I closed my eyes. And everything blurred into warmth, into breath, into stillness. No lines crossed. No words spoken. Only a nearness that dissolved every boundary, not with force, but with reverence. That night, I felt his presence before I felt his touch. His hand brushed mine. Our fingers stayed there, touching lightly, as though the space between us needed only to be named, not filled. We didn't speak. We didn't pretend. We simply existed. Close. Quiet. Undeniably changed. When I woke, the house was too quiet. The door to his room was open. His bed made. No shoes by the door. No jacket on the hook. Just a single folded note on the kitchen table. I love you, Mom. Don't look for me. You already gave me everything. I read it twice, then 3 times. And for the first time in a long time, I sat down and let the stillness cover me. Not as a punishment, as peace. Not an ending, a beginning. Of someone I was always meant to become. I sat in the garden until the sun rose. The air was cool. The morning smelled like earth, like newness. I watched the wind move through the leaves. I ran my fingers along the table where he had set the candles the night before. One still had wax frozen at the lip, a drop he never wiped. I didn't cry. I smiled, because he had seen me. And for one night, I had remembered I was more than a housewife, more than a title, more than a caretaker of someone else's silence. For one night, I had been named. And now, I was free to begin again.